Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the 5th Annual Soil Health Conference. We're excited to be here. We had, wow, what a great first day. Inspiring presentations from Dale and Jimmy, and then our opportunity to interact with everyone. It's been an excellent conference. Even though we're not in the same place, we are still being able to get some of our questions answered and have some great interaction. So today we have a full slate and we're going to get started here in just a second.
Have pasture, native grass, crop residue, or cover crops available to be grazed? Or do you need extra grazing land or forage for your livestock this year? Let's say you have the land, but how do you find and connect with those who have livestock to graze it? Or you have livestock, but how do you find and connect with those who have land to graze on? Introducing the South Dakota Grazing Exchange, created by the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. We believe integrating livestock onto cropland and proper management of grasslands are a key part of increasing overall soil health. So we created an online portal to help livestock producers find the right land for their herd, or landowners and operators find the right herd to graze their land. It's easy to get started. First, click the Create Account button in the top right corner of your screen. Enter your email, name, and phone number before creating a password and accepting the terms and conditions. You're in. Here in the dashboard, you'll be able to create a PIN or update your profile. Let's create a PIN to show people what kind of connection you're looking for by clicking Register New PIN. For livestock, you can choose from cattle, sheep, or other. For land, you have options for pasture, native, crop residue, or cover crop. Enter the address of where the land or livestock is located, or zoom in and drag the pin itself around the map until you've positioned it on the correct location. Then follow the prompts to fill out the rest of the details for your pin. You can even add a photo of your pasture or cattle. If you enter 2 or more pins using the same address, they'll all be positioned just slightly away from one another so they can be more easily seen. Once you're done, accept the terms and conditions and hit Save. Now you can see your pin on the interactive map along with the others, showing exactly where fields are available for grazing, and also livestock producers who have animals they're looking to move to grazing sites. Up here in the search bar, you can search specifically by location, livestock type, forage type, or simply hover your mouse over a pin on the map to learn about it. If you're interested in connecting with the person who placed the pin, just click on the Contact Owner button. You'll be prompted to provide your name, email, phone number, and a message to the owner, whose name and phone number are shown at the top of the page. Hit Submit, and the owner will be sent your information, and you can work together to take it from there. Head back up to the dashboard to register a new PIN, edit a current one, or delete inactive or outdated PINs. It's that easy to get connected. But that's not all. Be sure to contact us here if you have any questions, comments, or feedback by filling out your information and clicking Submit. You can also learn more over here about the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition and our mission to promote improved soil health through education and outreach, or connect with us on social media using these icons. And if you need any assistance, don't hesitate to contact us directly. Or we have forums, resources, and links to educational information at the bottom of your screen, so you can get the most out of this new tool and integrating livestock to increase soil health.
Good morning. That was just a little bit about our South Dakota Grazing Exchange. That is another website that the coalition worked toward. We talked a little bit about the importance of livestock and bringing them back on the land. And this was just an opportunity for us to connect people. So there's a lot of producers that do have livestock that are always looking for another place for them to go. And especially in some of the extremes when we're having some drought conditions, and utilizing some of that cover crop or those crop residues as an opportunity for the connection to be made. So we wanted to just highlight that and let people know it is available. If you are from another state, you can still log in and put that information in there. It can go anywhere, and it is a connection tool that has been a very valuable resource. Not only have people from South Dakota, but we have been working with people from other states as well. So we want to thank everyone that has provided the input and has gone on and made an account too. That grazing exchange is growing, and I think it will continue to grow as people realize the easy access of it. You just have to keep checking back and seeing how well or how many contacts you are getting. So thank you again, and we are just going to be starting here shortly with Nick Jorgensen. I did want to run through a couple of things from the HUVA too. This will be the last day of the conference. So I want to remind you, a couple of our speakers have volunteered to do our judging for our photo contest, which the photo contest, everyone has their phones in their hands and take photos out in the field, feeding cattle, when the new calf was born, when you opened the fence for the cattle to go or the sheep to go out onto the cover crop for the first time. Those are all excellent pictures, maybe some crop residue that you have, but upload those. We really want to showcase what you are doing on your operation, showcase one of those 5 principles. Any one of them will be an excellent photo, and we will want to interact with that. So on HUVA as well, we can do some socializing. The networking along the edge, that's an opportunity for you to meet up with someone and do some video chatting. We have different areas and topics. After the sessions, there will be some directors and staff going into them, so we can help with that, but encourage you to check it out and encourage your neighbor, a friend that you have that you see is in attendance there, check out some of the networking. Anytime, anyone that is on social media, use our hashtags for the conference so we can show people how much fun we're having at the Soil Health Coalition conference today. That is just kind of a couple of things that I wanted to remind people for tonight. We will be having our annual meeting and electing 3 directors to a 3-year term. So don't forget to tune in for this evening's session too. A couple of new things that the coalition utilizes our partners with. The Grassland Coalition is a key partner, South Dakota Conservation Districts, the USDA, NRCS. We work together to do a mentoring program. And this year we were successful in getting a grant for creating our mentor brochure into an app. So watch for that this year. It is started the process. So we have it at a company that is creating that app, but we'll be able to connect people more readily. But if anyone is looking for a mentor, please reach out to myself or someone in your own conservation office locally as well. But I can definitely connect you with someone. And if you don't have the book, contact us. We'll get that emailed out or mailed out to you as soon as possible. Another item, when you registered, you were asked if you had, let's see if I can bring it into picture, the Healthy Soils Handbook. And this is the book, and it was a great project that the coalition and partners took on, and it's an excellent resource. So if you don't have one, and you didn't receive your packet before the conference, you will be getting one in the mail if you mark that you would like one. So we want to get those out. It's an easy read, but provides some excellent information that I think everyone can go back to. You may not want to sit down and read it from cover to cover, but it is a opportunity where you can say, well, I need to know a little bit more about cover crops, or I want to check on something about manure management. And then you can just go back to that section and look at the Healthy Soils Handbook and reintroduce yourself to some of that information that the coalition has put together. So has some excellent links as well in there. It is available on our website as well. So if you want to check that out, you can download it right on from our website. or look for it right on there. The flip book is real easy to maneuver throughout that too. Another project that the coalition did this year was our soil quilt. Worked with Amanda Radke and Michelle Weber and wrote this book for the students. And it has been such a success already. It's been very near and dear to my heart. Going to have pretty soon 15 grandkids, and very excited to have them have that information in a manner for them to understand. So if you haven't gotten one, please check that out and go online. We are going to do a drawing later today, this morning, and give away a free book as well. We are partnering with Milborn Seeds, and very excited about that, because we will be providing a book to every elementary school and every community library to have this book and a bookmark for the soil quilt from us and Milborn Seeds. So we greatly appreciate everyone's input that they have shared with us as we work through that process. So it looks like our attendance is increasing, so I'm glad to see that everyone's getting in all right. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat in Whova, and we'll have some people monitoring those, and we look forward to another great session as Nick Jorgensen is going to be coming on here. And if Nick, you want to open up your camera, there we go. Nick is the CEO of Jorgensen Land and Cattle. He has been a part of that operation for how many years now, Nick?
Six. I've been home from college for about 6 years. Yeah. So
about 6 years. Excellent. Nick has been presenting at our soil health school for a number of years. He always does our economics portion, and it's been an excellent addition to the school. And everyone always values your insight into the economics and how well you can present that information. So we really look forward to your presentation today. And I will turn it over to you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the introduction, Cindy. And I guess I'm going to start off by saying, like you mentioned, I've presented for the Soil Health Coalition several different times, and generally those talks kind of center around economics. And to be honest, for this presentation, I did take a little bit of a different tack here.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, I'm going to spend 45 minutes talking about GPS cow collars.
Perfect.
Because we had a unique opportunity as an operation to try some of this new technology, which I'll go into in detail. And don't get me wrong, as a CEO, CFO, and for those of you that have heard me talk, I will talk about numbers. There will be a point in time when we talk about cost, benefit, but really wanted to highlight our use of this new and innovative product in 2020, because not a lot of ranches have had the opportunity yet. And we got the chance to test it and see how it worked. And I wanted to share some of those results around that. And, it really ties in with soil health, because right at the start of the presentation, we're going to talk about, well, why do we graze cattle? Why do we rotationally graze cattle? Why do we put them on farm ground in the first place?
Yeah.
And so it does tie in with soil health, but we're just going to talk about a really cool piece of technology for a little while.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about the vents. I've heard bits and pieces, and you touched on it a little bit this year at Soil Health School, but that vents is really intriguing. Before you came on, I showed the grazing exchange, and what a perfect opportunity for some different innovative ideas. So
no kidding. All you need now is a little box up there that says has grazing collars available. So
that's right. That will be our next step, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Really, really cool, and it was a great segue into this conversation.
All right.
So I guess with that, maybe I'll share my screen and just get started, if that's all right, Cindy. So I'm going to start with the obligatory introduction about Jorgensen Land and Cattle Partnership. We're a 4th generation family farm. We've been in northern Tripp County, South Dakota since 1909. You can see in the image there, that's actually probably one of the first photos we have of the yard we're on today, the base of operations, the barn. Both those buildings are actually still intact. They may not be for much longer, but they are. So we've been here for quite some time. My great grandfather settled here with his wife in 1909. Today, we farm somewhere around 13,000 acres. It varies year to year. I think this year it's honestly probably closer to 12 of no-till crop ground. We've been no-till since 1991, which was the year I was born. So, we've been a no-till operation my entire life. We've got a very diverse rotation. As you can see here, I won't go through all the different crops, but I think what's probably important to focus on are the 2,000 acres of cover crop, what we do behind winter wheat, and then the full season covers, which the last couple of years has been about 600 acres of each. And then winter wheat as well, because those are the three crops that, from a farm ground perspective, that we end up grazing the most. And some of the stuff I talk about today actually is based on, some winter wheat grazing and some cover crop grazing. So suffice it to say here, the summary would be it's a diverse crop rotation. That's intentional, from a soil health perspective. Diversity in the ecosystem is what we're shooting for. We also run on, it's a little more than 8,800 acres of native prairie pasture here in northern Tripp County. And so all the cows we own are managed here in Ideal. We've got a team in place that runs all the cows for us. And we're blessed to have, enough grass close where we're not traveling huge distances to run all our cows and keep eyes on our cows. But that cow herd is 850 Angus cows. And then, additionally, there'll be 150 here or there of some recips or replacement heifers. And it's all what we call our nucleus herd. So we've been in the genetics business since the late 1950s. My grandfather, Martin, was pretty well known for some of the things he did in the Angus breed in the 60s and 70s. And that tradition carried forward with my uncle Greg and then his son Cody, who manages the cow herd today. And once again, it's nice for us to be able to manage that herd close to our headquarters here in Ideal. And these are some images of the headquarters. So we got a 4,000 head CAFO feedlot. It's been built really since the mid 2000s. And out of that feedlot, what's unique about it is we don't feed cattle. We market Angus bulls. So all the animals in our feedlot are breeding Angus bulls. In 2020, we marketed just shy of 4,200 Angus bulls. We're the largest seed stock producer in the United States. And it's all based out of this feedlot here. We've got a multiplier network we work with that we buy high quality Jorgensen genetic bull calves from to supply that pipeline. And it works really well for us. And the reason it's relevant to talk about this in the context of this presentation today is we've got, about 5,000 animals on inventory. They've got a decent amount of farm ground and pasture. So the effort here is to take as many of those hooves as we possibly can and turn them out to graze as much as possible. So the cows run on native prairie grass in the summer. A couple groups might get grazed on some farm ground, and then we turn as many bulls as we can. Generally, it's about 1,000 a year, and that number is growing out on farm ground and pasture and things like that. And that's where this GPS fencing technology kind of becomes really relevant for us, because we can do it at scale and really make a difference in our operation with it. So that's what I'm going to talk about today is our 2020 use case of the Vents collar, right? And so first, I want to talk about, just give me a second here. Sorry, I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to talk about our rotational grazing system. So all of the cows that we manage here in Ideal are rotationally grazed and have been since 2017. Not a very long time. We rolled that out on our operation, so we received the Leopold Award in 2015, really centered around probably our farming techniques and some of the things we were doing there. And it sparked our interest to really figure out what we could do better on the native pasture side and the grazing side. So we went to the grazing school and, we learned about rotational grazing and things like that, and we rolled it out on our operation. So today, how we manage our cows is 5 to 6 groups of about 200 cows that have access to 5 to 10 paddocks. Some have access to more. None have access to any less than that. Most of those paddocks are about a quarter, 160 acres. And we're blessed to have most of that splitting done with permanent fence. So if you look at the image here, I apologize, the white lines are pretty thin. But this is one of our main pasture locations that is split with permanent fence into 15 paddocks. Now, that was done back in the 80s. So we took what was basically 3 sections of pasture ground and split it into to 12 to 15 usable paddocks. So we had a good system in place already to roll out rotational grazing, right? We didn't have to make a huge investment in new permanent fence or, concede to dealing with miles upon miles upon miles of polywire and temporary fence. We had a good system in place already. So with that, we rolled out our grazing plans, and generally how we do it is, we move cattle twice weekly until August. We're turning out in May, early May, and we're moving them twice weekly throughout the entire summer. And then we're moving about every 10 days after that. Some positive results, for those that have used rotational grazing on their operations, you know the benefits, and we've seen the same. The first thing we've noticed is more grazing efficiency and grass production on our pastures. Now, this doesn't mean that we've taken our pasture acres back. As a matter of fact, we've kept the same, and we haven't increased the number of cattle we're grazing in the summer. What we're really doing here, I like to say, is we're using our improved pasture efficiency and all that extra grass as an insurance policy. We don't know that it's going to rain year in and year out. And to be honest, a winter like this one starts to make you think about 2011. And we all know what happened in 2012. And we can at least rest easy knowing that we have some stocked native grass out there for those cows to go out and graze on for at least some period of time, right? That's not the approach that a lot of people that rotationally graze take, and that's fine. Every operation is different. We've just made the choice in ours that we're going to use this to improve the health of the pastures and leave a little extra grass out there for when we need it. Another thing we've noticed is that incidence of worms and fecal parasites in our cattle has reduced significantly. As a matter of fact, we've had some fecal tests done on our animals out of pasture, and a lot of times the people that look at them say, you must be deworming or something, and the answer is we don't. And what we've boiled that back to is with rotational grazing, you're leaving a paddock, after the animals have defecated on it, you're leaving it sit and rest for several weeks, and all the parasites that are in all that manure on the ground, on the grass, die. So by the time we get back, they're not consuming a live parasite off the grass, and it reduces your worm counts. It's about that simple. And then the third thing, we've noticed, at least on native prairie pasture, is, we're better able to track inventory. We've got a decent amount of cows, and believe it or not, it's easy for them to get lost sometimes. And the fact that we're out there with them several days a week, intimately in contact with these animals, we're better to keep track of them. We are catching illness sooner, injury sooner. And frankly, the disposition of the animals has even gotten a little better because they're just frankly more used to people, right? There's someone out there all the time. They're not scared, when someone shows up wondering, what the heck's going on? Why is there a pickup here? They're used to it. As a matter of fact, they're happy to see us because they know they're generally going to get moved to new grass. So that's the positive results on native prairie pasture. And I didn't even really touch on in this slide the positive rotational grazing results we've seen on farm ground. And I'll hit on the biggest one, really kind of sums it up for the things we're shooting for in operations. We've seen organic matters increase when we graze cattle on cover crops or full season covers or, some sort of dedicated crop for grazing. As a matter of fact, in some scenarios, we've seen these organic matters increase at a minimum 1% year over year, which is an extreme change. And we've got 2 years of data to support that, not a very long time. But I think the point being is we've seen our soil health parameters, if you will, improve from having cattle out grazing on our farm ground. So let's talk about the negative side effects of rotational grazing. It is an immense amount of work. We're managing 1,000 cows in 5 groups, spread out from east to west, probably about 30 miles, which isn't a long ways. People run cattle quite a bit further than that from maybe their headquarters. But what becomes difficult is when you're moving every one of those 5 or 6 groups 2 times a week, right? It results in an immense amount of cattle movement. This is just a screenshot of our grazing plan that we formulate for 2 weeks. And I think, there's 20 movements probably on that just for 2 weeks of grazing. It takes a lot of effort. We've got a full-time team. We've got 2 people that their job is just to manage these cows, move these cows, get ready for the next move, prepare fences, things like that. it's just a lot of work, and it requires a lot of supplies because, you know, I showed the image of some of our pastures that are split with permanent fence. They're not all that way. And there's still some that we've got to go out there and run polywire on, especially on our farm ground. You know, we're putting polywire up, we're moving polywire. You're keeping eyes on tons of different waters and mineral feeders. And that's why, you know, we've made some choices on our operation, what I would call missed opportunities, just simply to deal with those logistical challenges. We've got some paddocks that don't get utilized like they should. We've got some that get a little overutilized, just, you know, from a logistical perspective. Maybe we don't get to a movement. We've got a big pasture. We know that we can leave them alone for a while and not set anything too far back. It's not fun to split those quarter pastures. You know, it'd be great to see them be 40s or 80s, where we could manage that grass a little tighter, get a little more efficiency, but we can't do it because it would just be logistically impossible. And then the other thing that I always kind of get squawked at by, you know, the rotational grazing purists is it's very rare that we're moving by grass condition. There's enough movements going on, you know, when you're doing 1,000 head, that we got to do it by dates. We've got to schedule it. We've got to have it on a calendar so that our team can stay on top of this and not have, you know, to be worried about, well, when do I need to go move these cows? We make it so. And that's a missed opportunity. I mean, it's truly not the right way to do it, but it's the sacrifice we've had to make this possible. We're still better off doing it the way we are, but we could be even more better off, right? And so, you know, when you keep those missed opportunities in mind, the ability to not cross fence some of our pastures with polywire, right? So not being to take our quarters or some of our larger pastures like that are half sections or sections and divide them up, you know, that's a missed opportunity. And how do we fix that problem? And similarly, how do we move by grass condition versus by dates? So just keep those missed opportunities in mind as we start to talk about this new product that we're using. And then I want to talk about rotationally grazing on farmland just for a minute. I talked about we're making an effort to do this more and more. We found over the last several years that if you do it right, the economics are there to justify your cost per head per day, and almost make it, frankly, in some cases, better than more efficient than grazing on native prairie grass. We've found ways to make that possible. But, you know, once again, to properly rotationally graze on farm ground, we have got to use polywire under today's system, because we're not going to take a quarter like you see here. This is a drone photo of a quarter of full season cover crop. And those lines drawn across are actually mowed paths, right, that we use. That's where we're going to put polywire. My dad, Brian, who's a Soil Health Coalition board member, manages the agronomy side of our operation. If I asked my dad, hey, can we put in permanent fence in this shape on this quarter? He would laugh me out of the room. As a matter, I don't think he'd laugh me out of the room. He'd do something probably worse, and I wouldn't blame him. Farming in this scenario would not be fun. We cannot cross fence our quarters. We have large equipment nowadays, and we farm as big a fields as possible. And this would it's not possible at all. So we've got to use polywire, and we're still constrained by dates, right? We're out here moving these cattle. It's a little easier on the farm ground to move by sight, because most of the time the farm ground's closer to our operation. We've got more eyes on it, and maybe we can adjust that schedule a day or two. But it's still really, we're scheduling it out beforehand. But we have seen the benefits. Like I said, we've improved organic matters on our farmland. We've actually got some data to support that. The manure distribution out there is actually giving us a lot of extra fertilizer and improving our yields, which isn't surprising, but we saw some surprising yield improvements this year, more than we would have thought. And it's all from having cattle out on that farm ground. So enter vents. I've been complaining about all these problems with rotationally grazing for the last 5 minutes, right? Polywire, it's really easy to work with. I'm not saying it's hard, but you know, it takes time. And when you have a lot of it, it becomes incrementally more difficult, right? Miles and miles of posts and wire. It takes time to take that fence down and move it and put it back up. And so we got to thinking, you know, what if there was a better solution? And so honestly, how this all transpired for our operation was a few years ago. This was probably back in 2019. A company actually came to visit us, wasn't Vince. And they had, to our operation, they brought a GPS cow collar. Had a solar panel on it, and it was designed to function just like what I'm going to talk about today. And it sparked our interest. Like, how do we get our hands on something like this to try it? Well, back and forth with them, we just never really could come to a place where we got to try some of these collars. So I started looking for other options. Did a Google search and wound up finding Vents. I got on their website. I sent a request for information. And in January of 2020, I got connected with their CEO, Frank Wooten. And from there, we started a relationship with Vents. We worked with their team, kind of got a plan to get 275 collars on our bred heifers in the summer of 2020. That was what we were shooting for. We weren't going to go whole hog and roll out 1,000 on all of our cows just because we had no clue how any of this worked. We really just wanted to test it. And what we learned right away is there's 3 components to a GPS fence system, at least Vents's. I suppose maybe in theory there could be less, maybe 2. But the way this one works, there's 3. There's a collar on an animal that we place around his or her neck, a big radio base station that communicates with those collars. So it's connected to the internet via a cell connection, and then it broadcasts a radio signal to the collars who communicate back and forth with it to get all of the information up to the online platform, which is the third part where we actually manage the collar itself, input schedules for movements, track the location, track the status of the collar, things like that. So here is an image of the collar we used in 2020. This was their prototype, what they call their V1 collar. So if you can, I've got an image here on the next slide, but just envision that gray part around the animal's neck, and then the nylon strapping underneath is what holds it tight. There's also generally a lead weight on the bottom side that just holds the collar in place because they want that gray part to be up so that the radio communication can be as robust as possible. We received 275 of these in 2020. All the communication equipment is contained inside the gray parts. And you'll notice, I mentioned that first collar we saw years ago had a solar panel on it. This one does not. There's an internal battery on these things that is built to last about 6 months. So, when you think to yourself, my immediate reaction when I saw this was, well, that's got to be inferior to a solar panel, right? And I'll talk a little bit later about how we learned that it probably is superior, in my opinion. But here's the general collar. To be candid, when you build and size these to fit an animal, which here's an image of a couple bulls with collars on. I apologize. I didn't take as good of photos as I should have over the course of this experiment of the collar actually on an animal. But you can see the one looking at us here. There's the dive weight underneath that little black thing. And then the one behind him, you can kind of see the profile of the collar. Sits behind the ear on the thinnest part of the neck. We fit the collar to that animal's neck, which can be, to be honest with you, a bit of a pain because, when you're going to put a collar on 275 heifers, all their necks are going to vary in size a little bit. And if we don't put that collar on right, she can get it off her head or she can flip it. So it can be a little tough to fit it on the animal on this prototype collar. But once you get it right, it does stay on pretty good in general. Should also note that on the bottom photo on this other slide, those 2 metal prongs sticking out of the left side, that's the shocking apparatus. So there's a small speaker built into here that produces an audio tone, and then those prods right there are what actually deliver the stimulus to the animal. Here's an image of the base station. So we built these ourselves. Honestly, one of the things we had to contend with in 2020 was COVID. Historically, Vents had come to the site and helped us roll all this out. They would have helped install the collars and construct them and build the base stations. We didn't have that luxury this year, so we were actually their first customer that kind of had to learn on their own. And it turns out if you got a decent grasp on technology, it was pretty easy for us to build these base stations. They consist of a solar panel, which you can see there that powers the base station, and then some radio equipment inside of the metal cage there. And then the antenna mast that has the cell antenna here on the bottom, and then the radio antenna up above on the top. They can communicate with all the collars in, I think it's about a 5-kilometer area. It depends on elevation and the terrain of the ground and whether there's a lot of trees, which in northern Tripp County we don't have any trees. So our towers can talk for quite a ways to a collar. We've actually seen them communicate with collars up to 10 to 11 kilometers away. Not reliably, but can do it. We have 3 of these on our operation. 3 solar powered stations that are up in operation today, and we're currently constructing an AC powered station that's actually going to plug into power, so we don't have to worry about the solar power. And once again, these are set and forget. We built 3 of these in May, and I haven't revisited them more than once or twice, really. And it wasn't to fix a problem; it was just to check on them. They function very well and serve us greatly. And then here's an image of the online platform. Really easy to use. Actually bears some similarities to the grazing exchange, just from a website build standpoint. Here's where we draw our landmarks, like our permanent fences around our pastures, and where we input where waters are and mineral feeders. And then you've got the ability to draw paddocks. So how it works is I pull up, like this image here. The purple is a pasture. It's actually not pasture, it's farm ground where we graze some bulls. But in there, I just take my mouse and I draw where I want the fence to be. And it's legitimately that simple. You design them however you want them designed. And there's some tricks that Vince will teach you, about building them safely and effectively. And then once you got the paddock built, you just input the schedule, right? So I'm going to go to the group of colors and I'm going to say, I want you in this paddock for this many days. And then on this day, you're going to move to this paddock. So it's still kind of done by date, but it's easily editable, right? And to be honest with you, the fact that we got a GPS collar on that's moving the animals ourselves, I'll still take moving by date, simply just to test this product, right? So easy to use online platform. I've worked with it on my phone before. It's not optimized for mobile. It does work. Just you get a carbon copy of what you see here. And so there you go. I'll show a couple videos here at the end of some of the tools we've got inside of this platform. So let's get into what we actually did in 2020. So we rotationally grazed 275 heifers. We placed the collars on our heifers the day they were bred. We AI'd all of them, and that's when the collar was put on them. From there, we moved them to this site where they were going to be for the duration of this grazing test. And it really consisted of, if you look in the blue there, 117 acres of grass, and then 90 acres of forage wheat. And that's the green box, right? So like I said, we placed the collars on several days before we transport them to the area they were going to be. And the animals also had additional access to grass before the collars were active. So there was some more grass there before we rolled this out that they were on. The watering facilities were in this old feedlot that you can kind of see in the middle of the photo. So that's where the animals were going to water. And that was a key feature of what made these work that I'll go into in a little bit. And the collars were used in 3 phases. First phase was just inactive tracking mode, where we had a collar on a heifer that wasn't doing anything other than telling us where she was. The second was training, which is a critical part of the use of this collar. And then the third was the active collar, where we implemented rotational grazing. So let's talk about tracking mode first. For about a week, these heifers were grazed normally, but they just had collars on them, right? There were no vences. They were getting no sound stimulus and no electric stimulus. Gave us a good amount of time to figure out how they worked, right? See kind of what we were dealing with, get comfortable with the whole scenario. So this image here is actually, it's a grazing heat map. It's not a heat map, it's a point map. So every one of them little white dots is a point in time where an animal was grazing, right? So we were able to see kind of, how they tracked throughout the pasture. And actually we ran into a really cool scenario where the day we were going to move them to their training paddock, which was just to the south, we couldn't find some of them. There were 30 or 40 heifers that when we physically went out to get them weren't there. So I got on the Vince platform. And if you notice this little set of dots here, kind of in the northwest corner, there's a little rise here and they weren't visible from this pasture. And we actually used the Vince collars to find where these heifers were and go round them up. So, there was a neat application that before it ever even did anything from a management perspective that we had. So then we had to train the animals, right? So they grazed for a few days with the collars on. Then we moved them to this training paddock, if you will. So here's the idea. If you've ever used like a GPS collar for a dog, or say maybe an underground electric collar for a dog, it's extremely similar. They have to be trained to know what's going on when they receive that sound and that shock stimulus. So the ideal training paddock has fence on 4 sides, right? A real permanent fence. And what you do is you set your vents, right, to give them an audible tone as they approach the real fence. And then once they get within about 5 to 10 yards of the real fence, they get the electric stimulus. And how it works then is as they hear the sound as they're walking closer, and then they get closer and closer and they get shocked. Well, the only place they have to retreat is backwards. And so they immediately learn that when they receive a sound and electric stimulus, I'm going to turn around and go back where I came from. And that's critical to using this technology, right? Because if they just ran forward, well, you're not achieving your goal. They're gonna get stimulus, which I should just right away let everyone know these collars won't continually shock an animal into perpetuity. It's got safeguards built in where after a certain amount of pulses, it totally disables the collar, just to keep the animal safe. So, there's no worries about that. But we trained them in this paddock here for 3 days. You can see the red lines that's shock zone. So if an animal approaches and gets into that red, they're going to get a zap. And the little white lines in between are the sound zones. So as they approach, they're going to get a beep. And what was really neat was, if you look at my last bullet, over 3 days of training, 90% of the animals received a sound and only 10% received a shock. So that means that 90% of them figured out, when I hear this beep, I better go the other direction. And we didn't, they didn't have to take that electric stimulus, which is great, right? Because we don't want to just be arbitrarily shocking animals. This is only for management. And they taught themselves that when they hear the sound, I'm going to go back the other direction. So the point is it worked really, really well. The training did. So now the rotational grazing part. The animals were successfully trained. Now let's turn them on the forage wheat, which was just to the east of that grass across this yard. We divided a 90-acre paddock field of wheat into 3 paddocks that actually ended up being about 50 acres apiece, because there was some overlap and they had access to some acres of a feedlot and some acres of grass. Ended up being 50-50-50, right? And you can see the images here in the top middle. This is what I would call paddock 1. On the right here is paddock 2, and on the bottom here is paddock 3. Now you'll notice, like on paddock 1, there's no red line on the north or west or really kind of this east side. That's because there's real fence there. We don't need to put a management zone around where there's real fence. So everywhere you see a red line, this was vents. This was solely a GPS collar managing these animals, intended to keep them in the white area of each thing, if you will. There ended up being about 1 3/4 miles of vents. You'll see here, there's, 3/4 mile on paddock 1 and, kind of the same deal on paddock 2 and 3. And that was, we were going to test, how did this work? Now it's interesting to note, vents had never done this before. They'd never tried to rotationally graze animals on paddocks this small. Typically the products have been used to, keep animals in a larger pasture, right? That's not to say it wasn't built to handle this, but it was going to be a really interesting test for both us and the company. And there's a lot to be learned. So we rolled it out. How we did it was 3 days in paddock 1, 3 days in paddock 2, 3 days in paddock 3. And that really kind of concluded the mostly rotational grazing test, because after that, we just let them graze out the rest of the wheat. So it was a short amount of time that we tested this product, right? But we just wanted to see if we could do it. And here was the results. These are images here. I apologize. They're heat maps of the grazing, right? So in paddock 1, you can see it worked. There's a little bit of encroachment past the fence, as you can see kind of in the middle there. But the heat map indicates where there was a significant amount of animals. And you can see that they recognized the invisible barrier of the vents on their own. You can see most of them, actually, we ran into a problem because most of them spent their times in the sound zone. They figured out that if I get to where it's beeping here, I won't get shocked, but I can test the edge, because that's what cattle like to do, right? I mean, they've got all day to do nothing but figure out a way to get out. And so a lot of them figured out they could spend time in the beep zone there. But it worked at containing them. And especially when you look at like our paddock 2 here, which was all virtual fence. There was very little physical fence there containing them. You still got containment. They recognized the borders, they respected them, and they grazed within that area. So we didn't have to physically move any cattle here. What we did was, in paddock 1, when the schedule said to move to paddock 2, we devised a system where the animals went to the water, and every one they had to go to the same water tank. And so once they got to that water tank and their caller told them now it's time to be in area 2, when they tried to get to area 1, they couldn't, right? So the borders changed, and now they were getting shock and sound at a different place, and they just went where they weren't getting it, and it moved them. So we rotationally graze these animals without ever actually having to physically, with a human, rotate them. And it was really that water as a natural catch that helped us. And it worked well. Over the course of those 9 days, we contained 86% of the animals. One thing that you got to resign to on this technology is you're never going to keep 100% of animals in, even with a real fence, right? There's going to be some that escape. So the fact that we were able to contain almost 90% of them, I was extremely impressed with. I thought it worked extremely well. Now, there were some downsides. I mean, don't get me wrong. This was not all roses. This was a new use case for the collars, and we drained the batteries way faster than anyone would have anticipated. And that was because of 2 things. Like I mentioned, the animals like to spend their time in the beep zone, right? And that was just draining the battery because they were getting beeped at all day. They learned to ignore it. And it also triggered some mechanical things inside the collar that weren't anticipated, and it just burned out the battery. The nice thing was Vince was able to recognize it, change the programming inside the collar, so that won't be a problem in the future. And then additionally, we tested a back fencing concept. So if you look at this top image, for the animals that were escaping, the 14%, right, we wanted to figure out a way to get them back in. Right? Naturally, we had to catch with the water. So these fences function like a check valve. When they walk towards it and get into the white zone and the shock zone, they'll get beeped at or shocked. But once they escape, they won't get any stimulus at all until they go back in. So when they're walking back into a fence through the red zone, there's no stimulus whatsoever. So they're kind of recaptured. And if they turn around and go the other way, then back to the sound and shock. So we built these check valve, if you will, to try and keep them from going across the whole paddock. And it drained the battery more because they were just kind of constantly being managed in some way, shape, or form. Additionally, probably the biggest problem we had was we had some install issues. Like I mentioned, this was the first rollout Vince had where they weren't physically there to do the work. And there were things that we didn't know, especially as it relates to putting the collar on the animal. It's pretty difficult. I'm going to be candid. With their prototype collar, it was not easy. It was really easy to size them too big. And we ended up with a large amount of collars that fell off on us or flipped over. And when they flip over, well, they're still going to hear the beep, right? And it will still manage them to a certain degree. But those prods that are intended to deliver the electric stimulus are now just kind of shocking the air. It's not doing anything to the animal. So, with those install issues, it's still interesting to note that with all that herd pressure of half the animals that honestly weren't getting managed because their collar was on the ground or flipped over, we still were able to contain 86% of the ones that had a collar functioning on them. And when you think about the herd pressure of a heifer, right, it's pretty strong. And it'll illustrate it here on this first photo right here. This was a roosting area. If we go back through our grazing maps, this is where the cattle were spending their time at night. They wanted to be here. And even when we moved them into paddock 2, you can see they still wanted to spend time in that area. And I don't have the image, but of the ones that broke out of paddock 2, a bunch of them went right back to this spot. It's just the herd pressure of the animal. They want to be together. And so despite all that, we were still able to contain an immense amount of these heifers and rotationally graze them the way we wanted, right? But it doesn't go without saying, we did have some serious problems with fit. A lot of them fell off, and that's an experience issue. You have to get better at sizing the collar, and Vince is working on some improvements to make that part easier. But all things considered, it worked really well, in my opinion. This was a prototype collar. This was a new thing for us, and what we showed was we were able to rotationally graze these animals without having to be physically present, and it works pretty well. So that opens up the discussion for us of, all right, now we know these things work, at least in certain scenarios. What do we do next? And so we decided we were going to try it on fall bulls. So I'm going to check out my next slide here. Yeah. So We placed 200 collars on some 2-year-old bulls this fall. It was late October, I believe, or early November. And we gave them access to 720 acres of stocks and residue. You can see the purple image here is where they were. So this was a different scenario. We weren't going to rotationally graze these cattle. The whole goal here was just please stay in the purple. Please don't go outside of the purple. And we're going to use the collar to ask nicely and not nicely sometimes if we have to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to transition over to the Vents online platform for just a second to show you some real-time heat maps of how this grazing experiment went for us with these bulls. So here's the Vents online platform if it's visible. And what I'm going to play is a week-long grazing map of where the cattle were during the first week of grazing, and then I'll do it twice more to show you how the rest of the experiment went. So I'm going to hit play here. And honestly, right now here, what you're looking at is, this is where we train the bulls. We trained them in a feedlot pen. So that image there is our feedlot in Ideal. I'm going to speed this up for just a second. Sorry. Our feedlot in Ideal. Here's the day we moved them to check them real quick, and then we turned them out. So this is real-time view of 200 bulls out grazing on stocks. Now, this border here, kind of this little inside part of the F or the E, if you will, there's no physical fence. And then similarly down on this side, on the southwest corner, there's also no physical fence. Everywhere else there is. So on the west side, the north side, and the far east side, there's all real fence here, right? Now, we did put fences across the whole thing just because bulls are notoriously hard on physical fence, and we just wanted to keep them away from it. And so that was the idea. Let's just keep them off the fence and keep them in here. And you can see as I'm talking, and I hope you're paying attention, this is working really well. For the first week, you can see we get a little bit of leakage here. And what was going on, I mean, just to be candid, is we had another fit problem. We were putting collars on these animals too large. And bulls are rambunctious. They rub on each other. And they were able to rub these collars off, right? And so there's a decent amount of animals that rubbed them off or flipped them, so it's still tracking in, but it's not doing anything to them because there's no stimulus. And so they're escaping. As you see here, they're spending a lot of time here. This was an alfalfa field that was green. I'm going to transition to about 2 weeks later, to December 1st. And I want to show what ended up happening. So we learned real quick that bulls are and of course we knew the answer, but bulls are a different animal than a heifer, right? I think everyone's familiar with that. They require a different style of management. And so what we discovered was, if this will load, I hope it doesn't take too long. Apologize. Here we go. See all this? They started to figure out that if I grit my teeth long enough and take a couple shocks for a minute, I can go wherever I want and do whatever I want. And that's a bull thing. We did not see this with heifers. This is just what happened with these bulls. And we talked with Vince about ways to mitigate this problem, and we decided not to do anything and just let them go. But the point was, the comment I got from the guy I work with at Vince was, man, these guys are tough, because they're going to go where they want to go. And so as we talk about, the success of this project, I would say it was less successful than the heifer project, but it points us toward a different goal with the use of these collars, right? So how do you take a collar and put it on a bull and make effective use of it? Well, why don't we use it to just keep pressure off the real fence, right? What if it was just that? What if we were just going to do it so that they wouldn't go up and rub on the gates and rub on the posts and get wires loose and get out? I mean, there's definitely benefit there just in that. And so then it becomes a discussion of cost, right? So does that make sense? So with that, I'm going to restart my presentation from here. I apologize. Let's flip through it. All right, so cost and benefit. Pricing model is unique. We're renting the collars. We don't own the collars that are on the animals. We're renting them from Vince, and we own the base stations. So those are ours. They're in place, and that works really well. You might think to yourself, well, does that make a lot of sense? And the answer is, I really believe it does. So as a pair compared to other business models where you would buy one, and let's just say that collar was going to cost you $250 and it's supposed to last you 5 years. It would in theory cost the same as the $50 a year rental cost, all in cost of the Vents product. But here's the problem. If these collars break, you're buying a new one, right? If someone else's product breaks, you're buying a new one. With Vents, I don't have to. I paid the subscription fee. I get another one, right? And so in theory, there shouldn't be a difference, but I can just tell you from our experience practically, the capital outlay of $250 a collar that's supposed to last 5 years, half of them won't. Half of them won't even make it through the first season. Something will happen, they'll come off, or they'll need a new battery or some piece of new equipment that has to be fixed. And then owning that collar would really stink. So as far as cost goes, like I show here, $50 a collar per year. Now notice I'm not saying $50 a head per year. That's for the collar. So I can take the collars on these heifers you see here, run them on them during the summer to rotationally graze across our grass. And then in the winter, I can take those off, put them on bulls, and use them to keep bulls off our fences, or maybe, turn them out in an area where let's just put up some polywire and keep them off the polywire, right? I'm kind of a believer with these collars that some degree of permanent fence is always going to be necessary. That's just me, because we'll never contain 100%. And I don't want phone calls or someone in my operation getting phone calls saying, hey, you got cattle out on the road and there's no fence. What's going on here? You'd look foolish. So, there may be a chance someday that you could just take these and keep them in a paddock with no fence and keep them off the road. But for our operation, where we've already made a lot of investment in permanent fence, say on our farm fields, take a section of ground that has a permanent fence around it. Now I don't need to run polywire. I can rotationally graze around that whole thing. And all I have to do is make sure they stay off the road. The potential here is huge for us. At a full-scale rollout, let's just say we did have 1,000 of these on our operation. I firmly believe the benefit from reduction in fence repairs, just physically keeping animals from rubbing on them and messing them up, access to additional property to graze, and improved rotational grazing would outweigh that cost. It's $50,000 a year, which is a lot of money. But when you probably look at our fence expense over a certain amount of time, it's probably about the same. By the time let's just say we were going to start cross fencing our pastures into 80s, that adds up real quick at $2.50 a foot. And so you start to really realize that maybe this really does make sense, especially if we can learn the ins and outs and the proper way to use them on different animals. There's a place for heifers. There's a different use case for bulls. And for us, there's a really good opportunity. Now I say use case for bulls, but why couldn't it be the same for fall grazing, cows or a set of steers, to run them like the grazing exchange, right? I've got stocks cover you can run your cattle on with me from November to February. And I'm going to use rotational grazing to keep them off the polywire so they're not getting out as much. And maybe even, keep them first half of the time they're going to be on this set of stocks, and the second half they're going to be over here, right? The management implications are pretty immense and positive, in my opinion. So let's talk about future improvements to the collar just for a minute. Throughout 2020, Vents really they ramped up their product development and production pipeline. They have designed a version 2 collar that contains several significant improvements. Longer battery life. They learned with some of the experience we did here that there were some algorithmic things they could do to make battery life longer. They're building a more resistant collar that all the components are closer together. And biggest that I have found is easier fitting. A more adjustable collar that will fit animals better and hopefully stay on better. And they got a production system in place to build well over 100,000 of these things a year. 2020, I'm guessing here from kind of random recall, but I seem to remember them saying they had somewhere like 5,000 collars out. So, you're talking about a massive improvement in scale and production. And, things are looking extremely positive. After being intimate with the product and seeing the changes they're making, definitely headed in the right direction. So let's just talk about possibilities for a second, right? So if these things work perfectly, what could we do with them? And the first one is access to new property. I mentioned that in the benefits for our operation, and I think this image here on the right showcases it perfectly. This is basically 1,000 acres of ground we own over by our hunting lodge. And all those, the green is the property. That's the property boundary for us, which is presumably in the future or currently does have permanent fence around it. All those little white lines are hunting strips. And we don't want cattle out grazing on hunting strips. So if you look at this area here, this is all pasture that we don't use today. We absolutely do not make any use of it because it's impossible to fence, because it's around a winding creek. We don't use it. It's waste. But what if we could take these collars and just say, hey, would you please stay out of these white areas and go wherever else you want? No problem. That's a huge opportunity for us because that's 1,000 acres of grass that now we have access to, right, on our operation. Additionally, there's abilities to monitor time spent at waters and mineral feeders, so we can get ideas of how much of the herd is going up for water every day, how much is going and eating some mineral to kind of give us a proxy for consumption, and maybe figure out, if there's a group of animals that aren't eating it. Heat detection is another option with technology like this, because one of the first things that a female bovine does when she comes into heat is her movement pattern changes drastically over normal. And if we know what her normal movement pattern is with a collar on, we can also tell when it's changed, right? So there's heat detection possibilities here. And then really far out, I mean, this is stretching a little bit, but I mean, think about the ability to take satellite imagery that can look down and get NDVI maps of the grass, right? And where we can see with an NDVI image where the good grass is, what's been overgrazed, what hasn't been, and use that imagery with some predictive analytics to just tell the caller, all right, now it's time to move these cattle over here, or you've overgrazed this spot, and rather than putting it on a schedule, it's now just time to move them, and I'm going to execute that movement over to this paddock without any involvement from myself or anyone else in my operation or yours. The possibilities really are immense, and that's what's exciting about this technology is, we were prototyping something and used it in a pretty rudimentary scenario. We are not at all stretching the possibilities of these collars by asking it to rotationally graze some cattle. Possibilities are immense, and it's extremely exciting. It's cost effective, and should be a great fit for a lot of operations, I would think. Now, you got to be tech savvy, right? This isn't something for someone that doesn't like, doesn't like technology. I'm going to stop there because I'm a millennial. Technology is easy for me. It's not always that way for farmers and ranchers. So, keep that in mind. It's tech heavy. You got to be good with the online platform. You got to understand the radio communication part of it and realize that some callers are just going to stop working because that's how technology is. But once you overcome all those obstacles, it's easy to see the potential in the future. And with that, I have gotten through my presentation. I thought maybe it'd be good to have 10, 12 minutes, maybe just for question and answer. Cindy, if that's all right. So that's kind of what I have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, this will work well. We do have a few. I know you have worked specifically with vents, and just wondering, when you've talked with a company, do you know if they've ever used them on any sheep or any other type of livestock? No,
only on cattle, and frankly, the prototype collar was built for animals over 700 pounds, so it didn't even work on calves. It was shaped wrong. Now, the version 2 collar, I think, will work on smaller animals, but the problem you're going to have with like a sheep is you got to get through that wool, right? And it's extremely difficult. Not to say that it's impossible, but I don't think that is on their radar as much as really getting that cattle collar design nailed down.
Yeah. Do you know, could you kind of describe how does it fasten on? Is it buckle? Yeah. What is it?
Do you mind if I step away for a second and I'll just go, I'll show it.
That'll be great.
If I can get it past the image.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, well, he's doing that. I want to just remind everyone, this presentation, then we have a full slate today. So I want to keep everything moving, and I thank everyone for their patience. So he's back.
Give me a sec. I got to get my mic back on. Okay. So here's the collar. If you can see it, I have to hide it on my body like this. How it fastens on is there's nylon straps here and there's a clip. So I put these together on a dive weight, and then there's just a clip. You clip it on. And you would think this plastic clip wouldn't hold up when a 1,200-pound animal wants to rub on it. And what we found is very rare that they are able to break it. It has happened. We put it on a 1,900-pound herd sire, and he just decided that if he wanted to take the entire thing and flex his neck and rip the plastic apart, he could do it. But a regular animal can't. It just doesn't happen. The general issue we have is literally they slip the whole thing over their neck. They're going to rub on a fence post. I found them hanging from trees. I found them inside of badger holes because they rub them off just like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just trying to look through the chat here for some other questions. Very cool. Yeah. Is this strategy collar training rotation commonly used? I mean, I don't know that there are other.
It's not.
Yeah.
Like I said, that rotational grazing. Well, first of all, GPS collars are
right. Very new.
Very uncommon.
Yeah.
I feel like they'll become more common, but the rotational grazing part, we were the first to really do that.
So here's a question. It says, have you seen any changes in your species composition with your current grass systems, positive or negative trends? How about the changes in the dung beetle populations as a result of your management through this?
So that goes back to more just rotational grazing in general. And I think the short answer, yes, we have seen it. Now, we're also learning that, and maybe people that have been doing rotational grazing for a long time will know this too, but depending on the year, just the year itself will cause a lot of variance in species. Like, some years we'll think we've got every thistle on the place whipped, and then you get a different year for whatever reason, and all of a sudden you got thistle again in places, right? And that's what happened to us this year. It was weird. But then we've also noticed on some of our pastures that were historically overgrazed, we're starting to see a lot less brome and a lot more of these native big blue, Western wheat, all that kind of stuff. And visibly noticeable that the natives are coming back. Okay.
This is a question that is on economics, which I know you are very adept in as well. What is the economic impact to soil biology of winter grazing green tillers off of perennial forage? I don't know if that's
so we don't do a lot of that, and so I think that basically is asking winter grazing out on your pasture, right, on your perennials. We don't do a bunch of that. Most of the winter graze we're going to do is out on stocks or cover crops, some sort of residue. So I can't speak to.
Right. Okay, another question about the vents. Do you change the batteries or troubleshoot, or do you just have to send them back to vents?
Send them back to vents.
Yeah.
Now, that was with the V1 collar, and I might be speaking out of turn here, but I do think they're working on a system potentially where batteries can be replaced on the new one at ranch. But with the prototype collar, it was not an option. We shipped a lot of collars back and forth between Ideal and San Diego, California.
Okay. With your economics, how do you come up with a value that the livestock give the operation on cropland or anywhere?
Yeah. So this references back to a lot of the presentations I've done before with Soil Health Coalition. And the first thing that I'll mention, if you want to put a value for cattle out on cropland, the first thing you got to do is you got to know your cost, right? You got to know how many dollars those cattle are consuming out there, right? First, what the value of the available feed is, what you paid for it. And then that's generally about as far as we go, is we figure out what the feed cost us. And then you can do some opportunity cost analysis, like with bulls. Well, if it cost us this to graze them, $1.25 is the benchmark number in our operation. But it cost us $2.75 to keep the same bull in the same condition in a feedlot. Well, basically, you have saved yourself $1.50 a day. And then once you know that, and you know how long that bull was grazing, you can figure out total cost savings. You can figure out cost savings per head, cost savings per acre. That is the general, very high level approach that I take on our operation to figure that out. Now, if you want to talk about like yield benefit and stuff like that, that's a new one that I haven't studied. This was the first year where we saw something so marked that we could say, hey, this was an animal related thing. And we haven't studied it yet. So
yeah, I remember you bringing that up at Soil Health School, that's something you want to try to delve deeper into to see the benefit after having the cattle on that field and see what brings.
What we do know, and then the rule of thumb we go by here is we have yet to see some sort of significant negative yield effect that you could attribute to having an animal out there grazing in the winter, right? So if we're going to run bulls out on stocks or on covers and then plant corn in it the next fall or next spring, we don't see those grazed acres yielding worse than the non-grazed acres. So as a rule of thumb, I leave that blank. There's no change whatsoever. Is that the truth? The truth is that there's probably a positive effect. We just haven't measured it yet.
Great. What an awesome presentation. It's so exciting to see all the different new things that are coming out to provide, just an additional tool that everyone can see if it, weighs economically for their operations. But the ability to try new things is always a fun thing to see.
Yeah, and just if I get one more minute, I hope this was informative. I know this is probably a very new product to a lot of people, and I covered a lot of information pretty quickly. I will just put a plug in. I mean, if you're truly interested in this, get on their website. It was on it's vents.io.
Yeah.
Send a request for info and get with them. If you think it's a fit for your operation. I will be honest, it's not going to be a fit for some, and that's okay. But if you can handle a little technology and dealing with that kind of stuff, there's a lot of potential there. Yeah.
One question was, could you see making any investment in this tech just to keep track of high dollar value critters?
So we've done that. We have a group of what we call our elite cows, the best of the best cows we've got on the operation. And we did use it on them for a little while this summer just to keep track of them. In general, we're probably going to keep eyes on a high dollar animal like that anyway, physically, just be there to see them and keep an eye on them. So I would probably say the use case is the same as a low value animal. You're going to use it to keep them off the fence, locate them if they do end up disappearing, and get more efficient use out of your grass and covers and things like that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick. I know you really sparked some people's imaginations and seeing where they could go and how they could incorporate some of these on their operations. So I really appreciate your time.
No, happy to do it.
Yeah, and if anyone else has any additional questions, please don't hesitate to send them to us and we will make sure Nick gets them. I don't know if Nick will be able to join us for any of the additional presentations or on HUVA, but we will get ready for the next presentation, which Dr. Ratan Lal will be coming up here shortly. We'll have a short break. And I want to thank everyone. So you guys can go ahead and go on to your HUVA app. We will get ready for our break here. Let me see if I can get my screen to share.
My name is Don Nicholson. Along with my wife Trista and 3 boys, Aiden, Gavin, and Ian, we farm and ranch in Frederick, South Dakota. And one of the things we're trying to do is incorporate our livestock more into our crop ground. Where we live in Frederick here, the climate and the rainfall is very east and west. You cross 281, it just starts drying up more. So we have kind of farming in 2 different areas where the stuff east of 281, we have generally more rainfall. As we go further west, it starts falling off and it lends itself more to the livestock side of the operation. Initially, I started in a no-till. After college, I came back to the farm. It was just me and my stepfather farming, so labor it seemed like an easier avenue to go, less tillage, less work. So it started out as a labor saving, and then I started seeing, benefits to the soil and doing less work and still keeping up yield-wise with neighbors. We've always had livestock and we've always had crop ground, focusing on the cattle in the fields longer. Start seeing the benefits of the soil health. The crops we grow here are corn, soybeans, oats, triticale, alfalfa, and starting to do a little bit more in the cover crops. The alfalfa, I think, has been key for me to start identifying areas of the field that are not as productive, and allows me different time of the season to be able to get into those areas. If it's fixing saline area spots. In our area, it's also, there are a lot of potholes, so with excessive water, ponding, and ditch effect, saline areas start popping up and expanding, you know, if they aren't cared for or treated differently than the rest of your crops. I use a lot of precision stuff in my cash crops, so I started using that to identify the poor producing areas and then zeroing in on what those spots need and how to do it. And the best way to do that in my operation is through the cattle and bale grazing. Some of the effects that I've seen in the areas of where I have been bale grazing, after doing it the first year, you know, you get the cover, which I believe the cover helps eliminate some of that evaporation. It keeps the soil moisture rather than drying out and bringing all those salts to the top and then wicking moisture from other areas and pulling up more salts. It's part of the healing process. It might not look the prettiest at times, but it's a root in the ground. It's something that's growing. Also on our pastures, I have been rotational grazing for quite some time. Golfers say play the course, don't let the course play you. You gotta look at how the ground is and what kind of grasses are there and what you can do with it. Each area is managed differently, just like in my crop ground, each zone is managed differently. So there's challenges every year, and every year is a different challenge. And what I've found in my soils, you know, building the organic matter, having better soil health, allows me to weather through whichever weather storm I'm faced with. I wasn't born into farming, but from a very early age, since I was probably 9, 10 years old, I was been exposed to farming, and then got a great opportunity and a lot of freedom to try different things. My stepfather gave me a lot of freedom that way, and that's helped me going forward. I remember him always telling me, you know, do what you think's best, and you know, that's what I hope to pass along to my sons. You know, whatever they're doing is do what they think's best.
All right, I want to thank everyone for that first session and really thank Nick for his insightful presentation. We'll take a quick 10-minute break here. We're going to get set up for Dr. Rattan Lau will be joining us here at 11:10. Sarah Scroggins is going to actually bring up our wheel, and we'll give away a couple of prizes quick before we head to the break to prepare for Dr. Rattan Lau. So Sarah, if you want to share your screen. We got a couple of prizes here for those that were in Nick's session. All right, so we're going to be giving away a soil quilt book to the first winner. Eric, congratulations. Okay, Sarah, you want to load it again? We'll give away a couple of hats. Randy. Okay, want to do it one more time, Sarah? Greg. So excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. We're just going to end this. You can head back to the Whova and look at your agenda and get ready to start with Dr. Lau in about 5 minutes.